And joining us now from the nation's capital, Jim Watson, Mayor of Ottawa. And I used to call you Minister, and I guess I got to call you Your Worship again. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I remember when I no longer was mayor the first time, my nieces used to call me in the past tense your wash-up, so Your Worship sounds a little better.
I guess it does.
I haven't met many politicians who are worshipped.
You're going to forgive this comparison that we take off the top, but obviously lots of people have made it. You and George Smitherman sat in the same cabinet of the McGuinty government for a long time, and then you both decided to run municipally, and you've won, and he lost in rather spectacular fashion. Have you talked to him since then and kind of compared notes as to why it worked for you and why it didn't for him?
We've talked a couple of times. We actually didn't get into his campaign. I think, you know, it's obviously difficult. I don't know all of the circumstances. I was so focused on my own campaign, but obviously he got caught up in a bit of a wave of anti-incumbency. And in many ways, when David Miller decided not to run, George was the de facto incumbent, being the one person that was you know, viewed as almost the establishment candidate, and obviously it didn't work out for him. But you know, George is very resilient. He was a great colleague, worked very hard, did a lot of good things for health and infrastructure, and he's bounced back and will bounce back.
It's interesting that you describe him as the de facto incumbent, because in some respects, you were too. I mean, you weren't the incumbent, but you'd had the job previously, admittedly when Ottawa was a smaller city before amalgamation. So people, I guess, saw you as sort of incumbent with experience, but sort of outsider, new guy returning. Which do you think was more instrumental in your victory?
It's hard to say, Steve. I think both helped me, because I think my predecessor, Mr. O'Brien, one of the knocks against him was that he had no experience coming into the job, and it made it very difficult for him. He had all returning councillors who had lots of experience, and he was a private sector person who didn't have that council experience, and by his own admission had never been to a council meeting. So I presented myself, factually correct, as someone with experience, but also that hadn't been around City Hall for the last decade. So it was experience, but also you know, some experience at Queen's Park, which I know is helping me now do my job right now, because the province is very integral and important to all municipalities.
Okay, let's talk more about that job. And to that end, I know you saw this in the Ottawa Citizen a few days ago. I'm going to read a little chunk of Ken Gray's article that he did on the 17th of February. This is a city, he says, at war with itself. It's angry at the municipality, developers, community associations, planners, activists, NIMBYs, politicians, the National Capital Commission, rich people, poor people, privileged people, good neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, downtown, the suburbs, rurals, amalgamation, de-amalgamation, criminals, the police, car drivers, and OC Transpo. Very few areas in this community don't have a major beef. How did all this happen? Much of the problem is due to growth. Ottawa is pushing 1 million people, many more if Gatineau is included. That means more urban problems, but the woes of growth have been exacerbated by the municipal policy of intensification. Let's pick up on that. Do you think intensification lies at the heart of much of the beefing that happens in Ottawa these days?
Well, I think you can go back to when amalgamation was brought to Ottawa. We took 11 municipalities in a regional government and formed one. And one of the challenges we have, and most people don't always believe me when I say it, so I have a map that I pull out of my office. We're the largest rural community in all of Canada. We're over 2,700 square kilometers, and you can fit, just imagine this for a minute, the cities of Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, all within the boundaries of the city of Ottawa, and you still have space. We're a massive city. And one of the challenges with a massive city that amalgamation brought to us is that we're always dealing with development issues. We had a big battle that the majority of my council, I think it was 23-1, voted not to expand the urban boundary beyond what the previous council had already agreed to. There's always pressure by the development industry. Let's move it a little farther, a couple hundred acres more. And we have to be vigilant on that, because urban sprawl costs money. It's not good for the environment, it's not good for the economy, it's not good for traffic, and we have to have sensible intensification at the same time. And what Ken's talking about is our challenge for the next 4 years. How do we balance the needs for growth, because we have 6,000 homes built a year on average in Ottawa, with the need to protect neighborhoods so we don't have a monster home or a 20-story building next to a residential neighborhood.
That's a fascinating way of thinking about the city, and I suspect most people, when they think of Ottawa, think obviously political town first, but also second biggest city in Ontario second. but it's more accurate to say it's a big rural town as opposed to a big urban agglomeration?
Well, you know, from the landmass area, we are the largest rural community in the country. And one of the challenges, obviously, that we have with that landmass, it costs more for us to deliver transit, for instance. You know, Toronto is blessed with its compact nature, for instance. We have to send buses out to areas like Manotick and Cumberland where people live, but they're a long way from the downtown core. So we have our work cut out for us. You know, we can't cry over spilt milk. Amalgamation took place. It's been 10 years now. And we have a new council. Half the members are new, and there's a new sense of cooperation to get the job done, because we have to implement, for instance, a new light rail program. It's been talked about for years. We've got to start moving on that so that we get more people out of the single vehicle car, get them into transit, so we don't come face to face with some of the real problems that Toronto is facing. I remember, Steve, when I was at Queen's Park, I'd wake up in the mornings, radio would go on, bumper to bumper on the Don Valley, the Gardiner is backed up. You know, we do have some problems like that, but not as many as a larger city, and we've got to make sure that we plan for the future.
Well, you talked about the light rail, and let me follow up on that, because of course you have inherited now responsibility for Ottawa's single biggest infrastructure project ever. This is more than $2 billion, an east-west rail tunnel through the downtown. I guess first question should be, why light rail and not a subway?
Well, the previous council went through years and years of study, staff, experts, community consultation, and it was felt that light rail made the most sense for us in terms of affordability and practicality. And we have a proposal that has been approved by council. We'll go out to tender next year, and we're doing the core sampling now, a lot of the engineering studies. We need to improve our rail service, we need to improve our bus service, because we don't want to meet the same fate of some of the large urban cities around the world, and even in Canada, where rush hour just goes on and on and on, and it hurts the quality of life. You know, the great thing about Ottawa, I'm obviously biased, I'm a booster of Ottawa, we've got the best of both worlds. You're going to be coming down here in a couple of days, and you're going to see we've got the small town charm, but big city amenities, some of the greatest cultural institutions, sports institutions. Yet we do have that small town charm where people do feel a sense of neighborhood, whether it's in rural Ottawa or suburban Ottawa or the Glebe neighborhood or some of the other wonderful neighborhoods like Westboro and Hintonburg.
I know that in Toronto they've often called it, you know, a city of neighborhoods. That's what they said when David Crombie was the mayor 40 years ago. But can you really have it both ways? People don't say that so much anymore. Can they really say that in Ottawa still?
Well, I think they still can, you know, and it goes to the challenge that our council faces and future councils will face to make sure that we have the proper balance and growth in the community. We need growth. We need to expand our job base and employment opportunities, no question about that. But it has to be done in a thoughtful fashion that is not simply, you know, let's rush and slap up a building just because we can get more property tax out of it. We have to take into account the surrounding neighborhoods and the infrastructure that we have, the road network, transit, and so on.
Here's what the Ottawa Citizen editorialized a couple of weeks ago. This was their little Valentine's Day message for you, actually. It came out on the 14th. They said light rail proved to be too much for the capable former mayor, Bob Chiarelli, to complete, and Larry O'Brien's tenure saw only the broad strokes of this project approved. Ottawa needs light rail, but it doesn't need a huge bill. This will be Jim Watson's sternest test. And I guess the question coming out of that should be, why should the people of Ottawa have confidence that you're going to figure this out when your two predecessors sort of didn't?
Well, in fairness to Bob Chiarelli, he actually did get a rail project going, the O-Train it's called, and it's been very successful. And in fact, we're now looking at expanding that because it's been so popular, particularly the Carleton University station that serves thousands of students every single day. He did have another light rail plan that was ready to go, signed off by the two other levels of government, and the council under my predecessor, Mr. O'Brien, decided to cancel that. So we had to pay the price. It was a steep price that we had to pay, and we're back to a second version of light rail. I've taken responsibility of having the light rail project come to the committee that I chair, because obviously this is, as you pointed out, our single largest infrastructure project. We've got to get it right. We've dithered on this forever. People are fed up. When I was going out campaigning, they said, for goodness sake, stop debating it and start digging. And we want to do it, but we want to do it right, and we want to make sure that we live within our means. You know, the feds and the province have come to the table with $600 million each. I helped to deliver the $600 million as a provincial minister, working with Premier McGuinty. And they've told us, both federally and provincially, that's it. So anything above and beyond that, we've got to pay for ourselves. So we've got to do it
You're on the hook for cost overruns then, is that right?
Well, yes, but that's the great incentive for us to do it right. And if we have to make some adjustments to, you know, allow the project to fit the budget, then we're going to have to do that. But at the same time, the public are telling us, we've had this debate. It's like that movie Groundhog Day. You know, you wake up and it's the same old debate. Let's get on with it.
And you're not playing the part of Bill Murray, you're telling us, right?
Never know.
Got it.
It's a good movie.
Well, as you pointed out, we are coming to Ottawa. The agenda is going on the road this weekend. You're our stop number one for our Agenda on the Road series in 2011. And, you know, we're coming there to listen. We want to know what people on the all-day-long agenda camp on Sunday have to say in terms of what the biggest issues for the upcoming provincial election in October are. So why don't you start us off? Give us a sneak peek here. What do you think the biggest provincial issues are leading up to the election in October?
Well, you know, I'm again a little biased on this.
A little?
Of the things that I negotiated.
A little?
Well, when I was Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, we struck a deal with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. It was an upload agreement that social services, for instance, were the only province that were forcing municipalities to pay for a portion of social services. We've started to upload those costs. So it's not talked about a lot by the public, but certainly by the municipal politicians. We want to make sure that whoever forms government, that commitment and that contract is honored, because that is having a positive impact on the municipal sector. We can actually use property taxes for what they're intended, namely services in the community. Housing is a big issue. I campaigned on putting $14 million in new money for affordable housing. We have a wait list in Ottawa of 10,000 people looking for affordable housing. We have some of our affordable housing units, Steve, that are in deplorable condition. We need new build affordable housing. So we're going to be looking to the parties to see what can they do to give some hope to some of the most vulnerable people in our society, to get them a decent, clean, safe place to live.
I was giving you the gears a little bit when you said, you know, you have a little bias when it comes to the upcoming election. I mean, let's face it. You were in Dalton McGuinty's government. You were one of his senior cabinet ministers, and I guess that has raised a question in some people's minds as to whether or not, you know, can you go beat them up the way that some other people, you know, a lot of local politics these days seems to be about municipal governments beating up on provincial governments beating up on federal governments to make sure they pony up the money for the services people say they want. You know, you really can't go beat Dalton McGuinty up, can you? You guys are too close. You work together. You're too closely associated.
Well, yeah, but you know what? It's not my style. I was mayor when Mike Harris was premier. I didn't go around beating up Mike Harris because it doesn't accomplish anything. I think one of the things I learned in my 6 elections, people are tired and fed up to the teeth of one level of government fighting with another level of government. We saw what happens when governments work together with the infrastructure funding. I was making announcements with John Baird, who's a Conservative federal minister, and with Dalton McGuinty, who was a Liberal minister, and now as mayor. It works well when we work together, and it sounds like a cliche, but quite frankly, put the politics aside. We all represent the same constituents, and what can we do to try to make the investments work in our particular communities? You know, my view is keep our shoulders up in the corners, because, you know, Dalton McGuinty's from Ottawa, I'm from Ottawa, and John Baird's from Ottawa. That's a pretty good trio to be working to get funding for things like the Ottawa River cleanup. We're still putting raw sewage in the Ottawa River. That's not acceptable. To make sure we have enough money for affordable housing, for transit, for other environmental projects. And so, you know, there are going to be times where I disagree with Dalton McGuinty or disagree with Prime Minister Harper, but it's better to work those things out as opposed to having a rant session. It doesn't accomplish anything, and it just hardens positions, and people say, you know what, why do I have to deal with that guy? He's just going to go ballistic like a loose cannon, and you know, at the end of the day, you don't get anything for your constituents.
No, I appreciate that answer, but in our last 20 seconds here, Dalton McGuinty also said, you know, he's a provincial politician. He won't campaign for Michael Ignatieff. You know, will you campaign for Dalton McGuinty?
No, I've made it very clear that I'm staying out of the election. I'll obviously vote in the election, but I think it's my role and responsibility to remain as neutral as possible. You know, people are always going to say, well, who are you going to vote for? Well, of course I'm going to vote for my local MPP, who in this case happens to be Bob Chiarelli. But I'm not going to be overtly active in the campaign. I think the public want me to represent them in a nonpartisan fashion, number one. And secondly, it's my responsibility to work with whoever wins office. You know, I worked with Prime Minister Chrétien when he was Prime Minister, and Mike Harris and Bob Rae when they were premiers. When I was mayor, we had a good working relationship. We respected one another, and we got the job done.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mayor Watson. Good of you to be on TVO tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Steve, for the offer.